Very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. Welcome to yet another episode of Acfim Talks. Today, the 16th of September, 2022. Your host, as usual, Felix Kafuma, and we are discussing payment of the Democratic Republic of Congo reparation costs. I'll be joined by three guests to look at this topic, discuss it, give it justice, and probably by the end of today's discussions, many Ugandans out there would pick interest in these payments because this is taxpayers' money that is being doled out for an act where many are asking who should shoulder this burden. Is it you and I who never participated in the war and never took part in the loot, or it should be individuals being held culpable? With me, I have three guests, and all the three are regular on this edition on Acfim Talks. So it's going to be a small reunion, and it's glad that I have these three back with me again to discuss and do justice to this topic. But before we start, as it is the case usually, I take this time to invite everybody who is just joining us for the first time to subscribe to our social media platforms, because we are always live on YouTube. They'll be flashing on the screen. We are always live on YouTube, live on Twitter, and also live on Facebook, including LinkedIn. So just subscribe. You'll be getting the notifications, and you'll be able to not to miss any part of these conversations that take place every Friday, and they're proudly brought to you by Alliance for Finance Monitoring, Acfim, the Pan-African political finance outfit. Before I introduce the guests, allow me to give context to this discussion, and for anybody out there who is just joining us or who is just hearing this for the first time, but if you've been following the news this week, Uganda paid the Democratic Republic of Congo 65 million US dollars, which is approximately 250 billion Uganda shillings, in reparations for the invasion and looting by Uganda People's Defense Forces during the Congo War between the late 1990s and 2003. This is the first installment of the five, because we're supposed to pay in 5 equal installments. And this is part of the 5 installments, which amounts to 325 million US dollars, which is approximately 1.4 trillion Uganda shillings, that was slapped on Uganda by the International Court of Justice, which is based in Hague. In February this year, like I said, 2022, the court ordered Uganda to pay its neighbor DRC, that's the Democratic Republic of Congo, a whopping 225 million US dollars for loss of life. And on part of that, also on top of that, we were ordered to pay 40 million US dollars for damage to property, and then 60 million US dollars for damage to natural resources, altogether amounting to the 325 US million dollars, which is approximately 1.4 trillion shillings. But remember that the Kinshasa government had initially demanded 11 billion US dollars to be paid in damages. So even when they made such open demand, I think court found it that would pay much less than that. What are the key issues of contention here that should be observed and inform our discussion? One is that this payment, which happened this week, was made in such hush manner, kept under wraps, and want to find out why. Also, the bigger question is that where did the money to pay the first installment come from? We all know how our economy is struggling, the debt burden, and if you've been following, also we've seen civil servants, many of them have not yet been paid. So the bigger question is, where did the money to pay the first installment come from? And also another key question that should shape this discussion is about whether drawing such colossal sums of money from the national treasury had in any way an impact to the current dilemma government is in terms of having shortfalls to finance the budget. But also, the bigger question of concern is who should pay for the sins of what happened in Congo 20 years ago? Is it me and you, or should these acts be that were committed? Should they be? Should this figure, this amount, be levied on the individual men in the uniform that up to now some of them still live and they still live off the Congo loot? Or should it be a collective responsibility of everybody to pay for the sins of what happened? I'll call them sins of what happened in Congo. This and much more in today's episode of Acfim Talks. And once again, you are most welcome. Everybody who's just joining us. And with me, I have three distinguished guests, regulars. Let me start with Edgar Tabalo, Council Edgar Tabalo. I hope he's on set. If he's on set, let me introduce Edgar. Edgar is, I think it's the third time we're having Edgar, the second time we're having this discussion. I think it'd be great to catch up on these conversations. Edgar is a lawyer and a partner at Karuhanga Tower Associates and one of the leading firms in Uganda. He's also very grounded in the regional politics. He's also specialized in intellectual property, corporate law, construction law, and insolvency, energy, oil, and gas. He's not yet on set, but when he joins us, it would be great to have this conversation with Edgar again. I'm hoping Dismas Nkunda, another colleague of ours, another regular of this show, is on set. It's great to have you, Dismas. How is that side?
We are very okay, Felix. How are you? And good to see you.
Great. It's always a pleasure to have you on this show. Dismas Nkunda is the Executive Director of Atrocities Watch Africa, and is an authority when it comes to the conflicts in the Great Lakes region. He has followed the Congo incursions very, very, very closely. So it's good to have you. He also has a journalistic background. You are most welcome to Acfim Talks, Dismas.
Thanks, Felix. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And our other guest is Moses Mulondo, who is also a regular on this show, Acfim Talks. Good to have you, Moses. Moses is the president for Uganda Parliamentary Press Association. He's also an economist and a journalist working with New Vision as a leading senior staff writer on the national budget, and is also a coordinator of Greater Rural Development Forum. It's good to have you, Moses Mulondo. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Felix, for this opportunity. I am very happy to participate in this discourse. I think something good out of it will be realized.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Let's hit the ground quickly, and I'm going to start with Dismas. Dismas, we've been here before. I think the first time we had this conversation was when the court in Hague had just pronounced itself, slapped those costs on us, and we were trying to make a case of how do we get there, are we culpable, and where do we go from there? Now here we are. Uganda made its first payment, but the bigger question is, and I think even then we had a bit of a discussion around it, how does this become a problem of all Ugandans to find ourselves paying this money off the national budget? Yet it was individuals who committed these crimes.
Felix, that is an entire dissertation question, but we will hazard to be able to answer. First of all, the Uganda Army, the UPDF that is culpable in this matter is a national army. And therefore, the only thing is that we didn't deploy it. I'm hoping that Mulondo maybe will give us an understanding of the processes in Parliament on how an army is deployed. And therefore, if we didn't follow the procedures of deployment in DR Congo at that time, then there we can have other questions to ask. But the important thing is that actually what happened during that invasion, there was a commission of inquiry which the Uganda government put up, which was headed by Justice Porter. And it did find that actually there are some Ugandans, some who are still alive, who were culpable in the commission of atrocities that happened in DR Congo, the ones who bore the greatest responsibility, and they are still alive. But the point of the International Commission of Justice, the ICJ, the court, it doesn't deal with individuals. It deals with the states, interstate conflicts. And this conflict was taken to the court on the assumption that it is Uganda which has committed, Uganda but not individuals, which has committed those crimes in DRC. And it being a UN court, so Uganda had its own ways in which it could have, you know, defended itself, because I know that some countries did defend themselves, such as Rwanda. They did have their own negotiations, and they managed not to be slapped with that fine. But of course, we were very slow. We thought that it was a case that was going not to happen, not to have a greater impact. But eventually, here we are, every Ugandan. So it's Uganda as a country which was sued. It was not individuals. And that's how you find that we end up having even we taxpayers who never stepped in DR Congo to plunder or even to, you know, to cause the harm that was caused, are going to be able to pay out of the taxes that we contribute to this economy. So it's quite unfortunate.
Indeed, it's quite unfortunate. Moses, I don't know whether you followed this story. Actually, there was a short in the press this week. Not much was mentioned other than a bit of a write-up and a report that Uganda had paid. And many argued, like some of us who dig deeper, who double-click events, that this was one of those payments that was done hush-hush. I was to use the word hush-hush in quotes here. Yet, I remember when we were slapped with this ban, the Foreign Affairs Ministry came out and challenged, rejected. They even claimed that they would contest the judgment. So the bigger question is, what explains the concealment of this payment? Why is the government kind of like make the payment, but in closed quarters? And why is it that some of media didn't pick it up to really make it an issue? This is taxpayers' money.
Thank you very much. Before I answer that question, I want to get back to what Dismas was attempting to answer. How this date came about. Certainly, Parliament never approved the UPDF deployment in DRC, and even if an attempt had been made to seek approval, certainly there is no way the legislators at that time could have approved that deployment, because it was not justifiable at all. We were at that time not in DR Congo to fight any rebel group that was threatening Uganda, but we were in DR Congo to actually support a rebel group, RCD, that was headed by two gentlemen. One was, I don't know whether he's related to Dismas Nkunda, he was Laurent Nkunda, and Professor Ernest Wamba Diawamba. And this was a very strong rebel group that was having the backing of both Rwanda and Uganda, and it was attempting to remove Kabila, to overthrow the government of Kabila. At time reached when there were some divisions that emerged, and Professor Wamba was removed by another faction, and Uganda. So Rwanda was supporting one faction, and Uganda was also supporting the faction of Professor Wamba Diawamba, and that is how even they ended up fighting in Kisangani. But of course, since then up to now, both Uganda and Rwandan forces have been involved in plundering, especially mineral resources from Congo, and they mostly do it through these rebel groups that operate in DR Congo. And this is not hearsay. There are so many UN reports actually that have been released. There is one that was released in 2001 that found Ugandan and Rwandan forces culpable for plundering, for looting minerals, timber, and even livestock from DR Congo. So under normal circumstances, of course, the people who were involved in that plunder and who have enriched themselves, of course, they should have been held accountable and helped us in paying that debt. But of course, the commander-in-chief is the president of Uganda, and the soldiers who were operating under him at that time. J.J. Odongo was the army commander. Kazini was involved. Major General Moses Sentongo Diba was involved. Kale Kaihula was involved. Dr. Philo was involved, and so many others. And actually, apart from Kazini, all the others are still alive. So maybe these are some of the issues if we had a change of government that would strongly come up in the new government, and they try to pursue that case. Because as long as, of course, the current government is still in charge, it is very unlikely that we can see a very serious case coming up in our courts of law. So even up to now, recently in May 2000, to this year actually, there was the USA sanctioned our African gold refinery, the only gold refinery we've been having in Uganda, which is based in Entebbe, and the argument was that they are involved in illicit movement of gold from DR Congo. And by the way, almost all gold dealers in Uganda have been selling their gold to that factory, which is owned by a Belgian man. So right now, by the way, in the recent month, I frequently review our performance of the economy report. Gold had overtaken coffee as the leading foreign exchange earner, and it was accounting for 44% of our exports, because our total exports had reached last year about $4.5 billion, and the gold alone was responsible for $2 billion. But as we speak now, the latest performance of the economy reports are not reflecting gold as one of our exports, partly because of those sanctions, but also when government imposed taxes on gold here in Uganda, I am told people who were selling gold from Congo through Uganda stopped bringing their gold to Uganda, and they switched to Rwanda and other countries because of the high taxes that were imposed here. So that those two major factors, I think, are responsible for the fact that we no longer now see earnings coming from gold exports. It's like our gold exports have stopped. So, but now back to the question you have asked me about the payment. The payment was agreed upon that Uganda would be, and it was even specifically indicated the payments would be made in September every year to that tune of $65 million up to 2026. And I think it partly explains the financial crisis that our government is facing right now. I have been at the center of working on stories about the financial crisis government is involved in. In the release for the first quarter, they have not even released money for development expenditure. So many projects have stalled because government does not have money. They don't have money. They have actually even gone beyond the statutory requirement for the money they are supposed to get from Bank of Uganda. They got 80 trillion recently from Bank of Uganda. The law requires them not to get more than 10% of the revenue collection, so which should have been about 2.5 2.5 trillion, but they got 80 trillion. And actually, that is the reason there is a current standoff between the Ugandan government and the donors, IMF, World Bank, and others. And they are insisting, because even before getting the 80 trillion, there was another 3 trillion from Bank of Uganda. Government is supposed to have paid back Bank of Uganda, which government had not paid. So the development partners led by IMF have given a condition to the Uganda government that for them to continue releasing money, their donor support, the Uganda government has to pay back the money to Bank of Uganda that they are supposed to have paid. And that actually explains the current financial crisis that we have, that so many government entities are stranded. Even ministers have been complaining on the floor of parliament that they don't even have money for travel, for operations. Almost government is at a standstill, and the only money that has been released is mainly for payment of wages, and for carrying out government activities, the money is not there. It's like government is at a standstill, and it is because they are having a financial crisis. The bulk of the money, the little money that URA collects now goes into debt repayment. In the budget for the current financial year, debt repayment budget is the biggest portion of our national budget, accounting for about 35% of the national budget, about 17 trillion. Right now, about almost 70% of the money URA collects goes to debt repayment, and that is the crisis we are in. And I think now the payment to DR Congo of close to 300 billion has worsened the situation. And I think, I don't know how it will end, but we are going to continue in this financial crisis. First of all, our tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the world. Africa's average is 16%. Ours keeps oscillating between 11% and 13%. So that also explains that our capacity to pay back the debts is very limited, because our tax to GDP ratio is very low. So that means we do not generate enough revenue that we can use to pay back the debts. In the last financial year, again, when there was a financial crisis, government they resorted to cutting the budgets by 40% across ministries and entities, but also they resorted to more borrowing from the commercial banks here. They borrowed about 5 trillion. But now, this year, the finance minister was explaining to parliament recently that that option was no longer practical to them, because the debt burden has become so big, and yet they have limited resources they can. And you know, when it comes to borrowing from commercial banks, the interest rates are high. It's very expensive to borrow from them. And that explains the current financial crisis the government is involved in.
Thank you so much, Moses Mulondo. You've painted a picture of the implications of this payout in the broader scheme of things, and what does that mean? Why we are where we are at the moment. And in the middle of the explanation, we were joined by Councillor Edgar Tavares. It's good to have you again here on Acfim Talks. And I did introduce you already, but let me bring you in here to weigh in on this matter. I hope Councillor Edgar, you can hear me. I hope you can hear me. I want to bring you in on this matter, to weigh in on this matter. Moses Mulondo has partly touched some of the names behind what happened in Congo 20 years ago. And me as a Ugandan, and I'm sure there are many others like me, who would be wondering, okay, is there any way of recovering some of that money from the individuals who are directly held culpable for what happened in Congo? Or I know this much, you made a case that we were sued as a country, but internally here, is there a way, as Ugandans, we can now pass on the burden to those individuals who still live to contribute or to pay off this debt? Because it's quite unfair for me to be dragged into this kind of payment. And as a country, we suffer, just as Mulondo has painted the picture of how our economy is struggling. as Edgar comes on set, as Edgar gets his mind on the discussions, let me throw this back to Dismas, because for me until now, I'm still struggling to make sense of why those individuals, we know them, they live in Uganda, they live with us, some of them are rich, courtesy of the loot. Why isn't there a possibility, isn't there a way of making them pay and not transfer this burden to Ugandans?
Felix, at the time of when the Commission of Inquiry was instituted by the government, and they know the individuals, they know the people that were high on the agenda, they know the culpability of the individuals, but you see, majority of them are military officers. They are people all related to the army. They went in Democratic Republic of Congo as part of the UPDF. It is not like they themselves one morning woke up and walked into DRC and started doing what they were doing. So under the cover, if I am a country like DR Congo, or even indeed I want to get back my reparation, I wouldn't go for individuals, because those individuals came in the name of UPDF and fighting a war on behalf of Uganda, like Moses was explaining the different factions that we are supporting. It's unfair, of course. I would have loved a situation in which those individuals, some of them whom Moses names, individuals like Kahindo Tafire and people like, all those army officers, senior army officers that were involved, for them to be able to account to the Ugandans and say why they did what they did. They did it. We didn't send them to loot. We sent them to go and fight a war on behalf of the UPDF. So to that extent, what I'm trying to define, the parameters I'm trying to give you, is that as the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, cannot sue individuals, it sues states. It was set up purposely to be able to deal with the disputes between states. So what individuals did is a matter internal to Uganda. So we need to be able to pursue it. Maybe Edgar, who is the legal mind here, can give us whether there is a possibility that these people can be sued in the courts of Uganda, and we'll be able to get at least, even if it's not the entire 325, at least we get part of that amount of money that they looted, because some of them have property, whether we can attach some of their property, and we'll be able to offset some of the expenses that we are incurring as taxpayers, which really is quite unfair, like I said previously.
Thank you so much. Councillor Edgar, can you hear me now? Okay, let's go for a break as we sort out Councillor Edgar. When we come back, we'll pick it up from there. Whether we have we can have a mechanism of internally here making the culprits pay. Let's go for a break and then we'll be back in a short while.